Hello, my sober lovelies. Before we dive in, I'm really excited to announce my group coaching program for women is live, and you can join now. So excited for this because let's be real here. Quitting drinking isn't just about saying no to the glass of wine or booze. It's about what comes after. All the fear, the boredom, the late night anxiety, and the stories you've been telling yourself for years. And that's where my Rewired Sober group coaching program for women comes in. It's only $247. I'm being totally transparent on the price. It's for 3 months, and you'll learn how to shift your mindset, build habits that actually stick, and question the core beliefs that have been keeping you stuck, and find healthier ways to deal with that loneliness and that now what feeling. The best part is you don't have to do it alone. We'll have live group coaching sessions weekly, and there'll be a bunch of women walking through it with you. It's not another cookie cutter sobriety program for mommy vloggers. It's neuroscience meets real life, and it's designed for women to help you not just stay sober, but actually feel good living sober. You can join anytime, and I'd love to see you on the inside. So start today, get instant access. The link's in the show notes. Welcome to Rewired Sober, the podcast where we unpack what it really takes to rewire your brain after alcohol. Hi, I'm your host, Kate Vitella, a registered nurse, board certified in mental health and addiction, sober since 2018, and a coach who blends neuroscience, lived experience, and real talk to help women break the shame spiral and rebuild their thinking with tools like journaling, humor, and honest conversation. This isn't surface level sobriety. This is where the healing gets deep, grounded, and unapologetically honest. So let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Rewired Sober. I have been looking forward to this conversation. Today's guest is Michelle Folan. She is a certified health and nutrition coach and host of the top 2% globally ranked podcast, Asking for a Friend. She's a fierce advocate for empowering women in midlife to take control of their health. After a successful career in sales leadership within the health industry, Michelle shifted gears to focus on helping women 50 and over lose fat, build strength, and feel amazing through evidence-based fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle strategies. Known for her no BS, sassy approach to midlife wellness, Michelle coaches women to stop settling and start showing up for themselves, their future, and the life they deserve. Whether it's ditching diet culture, navigating HRT, or reclaiming mobility and muscle, Michelle brings both personal experience and professional expertise to every conversation. Woohoo! Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks, Kate. It's great to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited. A big reason why I wanted to have this conversation on air was because I'm 46 years old. My client range in the sobriety space is probably 100% of them are 40 to 60 plus, sometimes in their 70s. And the conversation constantly revolves around navigating midlife, particularly perimenopause, menopause, and reclaiming ourselves, reclaiming our body and various aspects of our womanhood, even our sex life, and just so many topics that we overlap in these areas. And so I thought, gosh, we could probably talk forever.
Yeah, I think we could. Yeah, and what's interesting is that no one really prepared us for this. These weren't the topics that we discussed. We talked about, going through adolescence and getting our first period and even getting married and, what to expect when you're expecting. But then when we go into perimenopause and menopause, many of us have these symptoms And we don't even know that's what it is.
Yeah.
So I think the veil is starting to come off
Mhm.
on this topic. We're starting to hear more about it in social media and the news, but oh, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, this certainly wasn't something that was talked about a lot when I was becoming an adult. But these days, I do feel like it's a bit more prevalent on social media, and we have, celebrities with influencer brands, Goop and all these different various celebrities that talking about menopause, Cameron Diaz and Gwyneth Paltrow, and it is helpful in that sense. But before we dive too far into the conversation, I wanted to have you give us a little context for the listeners into starting with the conversation around alcohol. Because this is another conversation that, we didn't talk about this a lot when we were growing up or when we were in our 20s and 30s. And today it seems like a conversation that is much more popular. Women, particularly in midlife, are finding out now more about how alcohol is impacting their brain and body. They're taking a closer look at their relationship with alcohol and sort of reconfiguring, how they want alcohol to be in their lives. And, particularly the women I work with, of course, are all working towards sobriety, but some listening to the show are sober curious. And so will you talk to us about your personal journey?
Yeah. And I think when I tell my story, people will be able to identify with this. I was in the corporate world and, there was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of entertaining. And so it would be nothing to go to an event, dinner with a client or a customer and have, 2, 3, cocktails, glasses of wine, whatever. When COVID hit, I started to really reflect on the amount of alcohol we were drinking. I wasn't working at the time. So I didn't have the constraints of having to get up early in the morning. And there were nights, Kate, where I'm thinking, oh my God, I just almost polished off a bottle of wine all by myself. And it became kind of that mindless, there was nothing else to do except do Netflix and drink in the evenings. And my own sober curious journey probably began even before that. It was with my last job prior to the pandemic. But I decided that I was going to do a 21-day challenge, online challenge with a group, and it really opened my eyes because for the first time, I went 3 weeks with no alcohol, and it gave me an opportunity to see what that felt like, and it felt pretty darn good. And that's something that I think happens with many of us, that if you give yourself a week or 2 without it, you start to realize, "Oh my gosh, I'm so much more productive.
Mhm.
I slept so much better last night." And I'm in the midst of hot flashes, night sweats, all of those things, and I realized, "Oh my god, the alcohol was exacerbating that incredibly." So then I did get another job, after the pandemic, and during that time, I really dialed back my drinking. I didn't go back to where I had been before because I knew in order for me to be able to be successful, not only in my job, but in life, I needed to continue to be very mindful of my relationship with alcohol. And what's interesting, if I get thrown into a situation where there's a lot of drinking, like a wedding or, a big celebration or whatever, Kate, I find that I can't keep up. Like there's no possible way I can keep up because I know that 1 drink, okay, 2 drinks, I'm going to feel it the next day for sure. 3 drinks, it's a 2-day hangover.
Yeah.
And women start to realize that once we start to go into perimenopause, that, we start to lack that dehydrogenase that helps us break down alcohol. And so you almost have to reassess at that point just from a physiologic perspective. So now I haven't had anything to drink for days now. Um, but I know that if I have something, it's just one cocktail now. I can't do more than that and be functioning the next day.
Yeah, you said something about your drinking in the pandemic and used the word mindlessness. And I've said on this podcast in the past, like addiction and repetition and heavy drinking sort of thrives in mindlessness because it's more of reacting and less of pausing and reflecting and listening to your body and saying, what is it that I really need here? Do I need a snack? Do I need a nap? Do I need a glass of water? And in this mindless habit of reaching for something quickly to dull the pain, make us feel comfortable, make us feel relaxed, all the things. And so I'm glad you brought that up. And the other piece was what I've found is it's almost inevitable by midlife that we come to the conclusion that, whoa, alcohol is just not our friend. Like even people who aren't facing like a raging alcohol problem like I was, they're slowly coming through age to realize like, ooh, alcohol messes with my hormones. It messes with my sleep. It spikes my blood sugar. It's a depressant when we're
Yeah.
already struggling with all of these things. So, I try not to be like on this podcast ripping on alcohol all the time. And obviously, alcohol is not my friend, but it's also not the enemy here. I think people have really personal relationships with alcohol, and only you know if it's a backstabbing asshole.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, only you
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah, and when so being a health coach, I have to bring these things forward for my clients so they understand the ramifications of drinking while they're trying to get healthy. And I'm not talking just lose weight. I'm talking long term, let's build a foundation for health. So when you're 80, you're mobile, you're not a burden on your kids, all those things. And one thing I have to remind them is your body sees it as a toxin and it's the acetaldehyde that is the evil piece of all this. Your body is going to do everything it can to get rid of that. And that means putting all of your other metabolism on the back burner. So I use this as an example. You go out for a lovely steak dinner, you have the garlic mashed potatoes, the big salad, the filet, and a big glass of red wine. Well, that big meal you just ate is going to sit and wait and possibly be stored as fat because your body is telling you you need to metabolize that glass of wine first because it's seeing it as a toxin. It's science. There's just no getting around it. So I just try to put things in terms of the reality, the science, and let my clients make that decision for themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't make anyone stop drinking. Even as a quote sobriety coach, I have really come to know that it's a very personal decision. I can talk to people about the benefits of sobriety and I can talk about rewiring the brain, but people will ultimately let it go when they are ready. And sometimes that starts with a sober curious journey. Now, I am not a person that could ever moderate. I could never have one glass. Or maybe I could one time, and then the next week when I tried that awesome trick of one fancy glass of wine, it would turn into complete debauchery. And so the myth of moderating, that ship has sailed. But I want to pivot to one of the areas you are kind of an expertise on in working with midlife women, and that is menopause. Um, because estrogen isn't just a reproductive hormone, right? It supports our mood, our metabolism, our memory. So there is probably a lot that goes into coaching women around these transitions. So I really wanted to pick your brain on this.
Yeah,
What
it's a
kind of
biggie.
conversations are you having with clients?
Well, so most of my clients are actually 55 plus. So
Mhm.
I'm getting into the 60s and 70s as well, like you are. And again, we haven't been coached or, given that information about the impact of our hormone health on the whole menopause journey and how we're feeling. Estrogen is a really interesting one because so much of it is tied to like dry eye, ringing in our ears, like weird things, like joint pain. We know the hot flashes and all of those types of things that we get, but it's some of the other weird symptoms that people don't necessarily connect to lack of estrogen. But the big things that we have to be mindful of are bone health because, we're losing bone mass year over year over year. And when we stop estrogen production, we have to have some strategies in place to make sure that we're preserving our bone. And some of that is just really our diet, right? Making sure we're getting enough protein, doing weight bearing exercise, and also making sure you're getting impact. And that's more than just walking, that's actually doing jumping, which, some people hate, but you need that bone impact. Um, and then, you know, I th- there's some women that are not candidates for HRT
Yeah, I'm
for
not.
home. Yeah. So if you're not a candidate for HRT, then we've got to put some things in place. First of all, every woman, whether you can take the oral or do the patch estrogen, everybody can do vaginal estrogen, and that is super important. I will tell you, it gets missed a lot. Women are like, "Oh, I don't worry about it. No, I don't have, a sexual relationship," and I'm like, that doesn't matter. Your that tissue in there dries up and shrinks just like our faces start to lose elasticity. We start to lose elasticity in the vaginal walls as well. And that vaginal estrogen is like using a great face cream because everything is so closely tied down there. And then don't forget about the vulva, because that also is very responsive to topical vaginal treatment. And you can also use it on your face too, but that's a whole nother story,
I
a
love
whole
that.
nother topic. But if you have recurring UTIs or someone that has had recurring UTIs as they've gotten older, this can absolutely be preventative for those types of things. So I tell people, look, if you can't do estrogen replacement therapy, at the very least, do the vaginal because it's a game changer and can really make you a lot more comfortable later in life too.
That's good information. I'm laughing to myself and telling my husband later, like, "What'd you talk with Michelle about?" "Oh, we talked about the vag, and, the other thing that comes to mind is if I'm jumping, I'm gonna pee my pants." So, anyway,
Oh,
I
the vaginal estrogen helps with that too. So it helps with urinary incontinence. So I'm telling you, everything is interconnected down there. And the really good news is that the American Urological Association has just put out a huge recommendation that for genitourinary syndrome of menopause, that vaginal estrogen is a very appropriate treatment for that. And there is a huge hearing on Capitol Hill today, as a matter of fact, as we speak. All these high powered women's health experts are going before Congress today to get the black box warning removed from vaginal estrogen.
Wow. See,
It's
all these things
huge.
we don't think about in relationship to
Yeah.
menopause and perimenopause. We
Yeah.
just think about the hot flashes.
I know, but there's a lot to consider there. So and then, we've got, and I don't know if you want to go down this road, but sexual desire,
Yeah.
all those things too are directly connected to our hormones. And so there's topical testosterone, there's also progesterone, which you would want to take if you are on estrogen, because it counterbalances the estrogen. So there's a lot to consider there, but I have to say, you've got to find the right doctor that can have these discussions with you because not every
Yeah.
doctor is comfortable prescribing.
Yeah, for sure. I just went to my doctor this week and was talking about the night sweats, hot flashes, and the first question he asked me was, "How much are you drinking?" And so
Mm,
I was actually very pleased that his mind made that connection. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is a conversation my friends and I are all having almost all the time. And in my circles, because we are all sober or trying to get sober and maintain our sobriety, it feels like just this second layer of shit we have to deal with.
yeah.
It feels so incredibly challenging for people, especially, my clients I'm talking to are trying to get and maintain sobriety while also going through menopause. So we're talking massive mood swings,
Mm,
massive issues with sleep disruption. And a lot of the things that I'm talking about, besides the vag, are the same as you in terms of you have to fuel your body with proper nutrition. You have to move. You have to sleep. And, these really basic sort of health coaching topics.
yeah. And the sleep piece, I mean, everyone listening right now knows that alcohol disrupts your sleep. Well, sleep, I will say, is probably the most important pillar of health and wellness.
I agree. I agree with you there.
And without a doubt. And so women were already struggling because as our estrogen declines, our cortisol starts going through the roof, which increases that anxiety that we have. And if you're sleep deprived, your cortisol is going to be higher.
Mhm.
When your cortisol's high, you tend to not make good food choices. So there's this whole snowball effect there. Cortisol also is the nasty little hormone that makes us gain weight around our middles,
Yeah.
which is a huge shift for some of us who never had any fat on our middles. All of a sudden, I'm like, I think my stomach was jiggling when I just walked down the steps, and
Yes.
that was a big wake up call too.
Yeah.
With some of those body changes.
I agree with you on the sleep thing. Geez, I can't stress that enough. And I particularly was a person who suffered from horrid insomnia. And so drinking kind of started as a way to knock myself out at night. And when I was introduced to proper sleep hygiene and even a medication to help me sleep, it was an absolute game changer. I mean, protect your sleep like a dragon guarding their, golden fortress. I mean,
Oh, I agree.
I love all the things that you mentioned about cortisol as well. When we don't sleep, we choose bad food choices, right? We drink extra caffeine to boost ourselves. We probably add in some sugar because we're looking to stay awake, keep going. I mean, I worked night shift as a nurse and you should see what food we have in the nurse's station. I mean, it's sugar and caffeine.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. And I tell my clients, look, if you eat sugar, you're going to crave more sugar because you're going to your blood sugar is going to go way up and that's going to crash and then your body's going to want that quick fix again. And that's just more sugar. You're not typically reaching for a couple hard boiled eggs.
Yeah, no, for
You're
sure.
you're going to go for the cookies, right? And
Yeah.
that's just how we're built, you know.
So how are you addressing the mood swings?
Oh gosh. So first of all, sleep. Okay. That's the big one. I think cutting back on your alcohol is is a huge one. There's this witching hour, and you know what I'm talking. It's wine o'clock, whatever time that is. And we've gone all day. We've been all over the place, moods fluctuating, and we think at that point of the day, this is my reward. This is what's going to calm me down. And I think it does just the opposite because the next day you're back at square one and it may be worse,
Yeah.
you know? Um, I think in terms of also the mood swings, it's making sure you're active during the day. And that means getting out and walking. And that doesn't mean you have to go out for an hour walk, because for those of us that work, that may not be a reality. It's it's the 10-15 minute walk after you eat. It's the doing 10 squats next to your desk every hour, setting an alarm on your phone. Doing little things like that to make sure that you're managing that stress during the day with movement. And
Yes.
one other thing, hydration. So much of that anxiety that we feel during the day, sleeplessness, hunger, some of those things are really dehydration. And you'd be super surprised, Kate, how dehydrated women really are.
Oh, no, I wouldn't be.
Oh my gosh. I I I will talk to clients and I'll say, so give me a sense of how much water you drink during the day, and they'll go probably 30 ounces. And I'm saying, okay, you have to drink at least half your body weight
Yeah.
in ounces per day. Um, and this is the other one. Talk about managing your cortisol levels. Your cortisol levels typically are higher in the morning, that first hour. If you can hold coffee off for an hour or plus, if you can get past an hour, have 16 to 20 ounces of water with a little bit of electrolyte or even some good Celtics like sea salt in there, it will do amazing things to set you up for the day in terms of all that built up cortisol, which amps up the anxiety. So the other thing is protein,
Mhm.
right? So sugar's not going to make you feel calmer,
No, no.
right? If you can be sure to get at least 30 to 35 grams of protein in that first meal of the day, that will also help make you feel a little more stable throughout the day and also help with food cravings. And so you make better food choices.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to circle back to you talking about the mood swings, and, I have done, quite a bit of speaking around this subject, and I won't go into it on this podcast, but to offer up something about how alcohol works in the brain and body, sometimes I describe the A-B process, whereas, the A process being that the alcohol causes the relaxation, increases GABA, decreases cortisol and adrenaline. And the flip side is that the brain will rebalance with anything we throw into it, right? So, because your brain is always seeking balance. So, you throw in a depressant, and your brain is going to increase cortisol and adrenaline levels. And it completely shifts in terms of what it does into your system. And if you study, like, the opponent process theory of addiction, and again, I won't go into that, I'll tape a separate episode on that. But essentially, what goes up must come down, and your brain is always seeking balance. And the opponent process theory says essentially that whatever trigger or craving you are seeking to relieve with a substance, like alcohol, you can expect the opposite reaction as a withdrawal. So
Yeah.
you try to relax, you drink some alcohol, you can expect to feel more anxious later. It is absolute science. It works with every type of substance we throw in the body, good or bad. So, and that works with good things we do to our body as well. Like, people do cold plunges. Why? Because that heightened increase in awareness and adrenaline. Then the flip side is it causes a sense of calm, relaxation, and clarity and wellness. It's such a bad stimulus to be dunked into an ice tank. I can't imagine it feels good.
I'll
Then
never do
the
it.
after effect, I've never done it because I hate cold. Then the after effect is you do feel good. So, anyway, I'm going off on my own.
No, I appreciate that. As a matter of fact, that'll give me some good ammo for when we do have this conversation, because I get it. We look at that cocktail or that glass of wine as the reward.
Yeah.
And so I understand that mentality. It's also the habit of when you're making dinner and it's like the theater of cooking and having that glass of wine or little cocktail there, it it just makes it feel more fun or more fabulous
It
than it
does,
actually
absolutely.
is, right?
Yeah, it churches up the whole experience to this more glamorous process. Absolutely. We have these conversations all the time, in my coaching sessions. And so one other thing I wanted to ask, and well, lots of questions, but I can't help but think this, and this comes to mind every single time I talk to a person who coaches around health, fitness, diet, exercise. Um, we know that alcohol is poison. I mean, it just is, right? Um, Back in the day, we thought if you moderate and just have a little bit of alcohol, it's actually good for you, right? We used to tell people to have a few glasses of red
Yeah,
wine,
yeah, red wine.
but the science has improved and it's different now. And I'm curious as to why you think so many people are holding on to the myth of trying to moderate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think because they're not ready to give it up.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll put myself in that camp. Just not ready to like say forever. That scares people saying forever, right? They haven't quite embraced the associated with 7 plus cancers. Those types of things. So I think there's a little bit of that. They don't want to be different. They don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
They don't want to be, oh, they're no fun, that kind of thing. And I know moderation is in the sober circles, moderation is almost like a dirty word because it is really difficult for most people. I can say that for sure. Um, but yeah, I just think culturally alcohol's been so accepted and ingrained in us that it's okay, right? You remember it was the go to a party. Well, this is my strategy. I'll have a cocktail or a glass of wine, and then I'll have some water.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
then
for sure. I did
right?
that.
We can do all kinds of dances to justify the having more than one, but at the end of the day, it's alcohol, it's toxin, it's poison. So here I am, I'm talking out both sides of my mouth, but I yeah,
No, I appreciate, sorry to cut you off, but I appreciate having this honest level of conversation, and I didn't mean to kinda throw you off with that question.
no, 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 it's
But you
okay.
you are right in the sense that if you're not struggling with alcohol, you can moderate. Like, not everybody has an alcohol addiction like I did. I was a person who would go from, 1 glass to 3 bottles. There was no moderating. So there are some people out there who don't find a lot of merit. Their pleasure centers maybe don't light up quite as much as mine did, and they can have 1 glass. I wanna be really clear on that. They can have a drink at a wedding and not go home and drink 800 bottles of champagne. There are
Right.
people.
Yeah, but I can even say for myself, and I use the pandemic as the example, where I really felt like my off button was broken. It was, "Oh, why not?" We're just sitting around and, I'd have a glass of wine with dinner, maybe another glass while I was cooking, and then I'd have a bourbon. Well,
Mhm, yeah.
I'm, 110 pounds. Why I should not be drinking 3 glasses of alcohol. That's ridiculous, you know? Um, but could probably do 4 or 5, right? During the pandemic and not worry about it because I didn't have anything to do the next day. It's you can justify it all you want, but it is what it is. It's terrible for you. And I know that. And I just know I'm better not doing that any
Yeah.
longer, you know?
You mentioned, the reasons why people don't wanna give it up entirely, and I completely understand. Um, and I'm curious if you think that because I see a lot of shame around conversations, especially like with menopause. You don't hear women like proudly talking about how excited we are to be midlife and menopausal and going through hot flashes and vag dryness and
Mhm.
weight gain. And I feel like there's an overlapping shame in talking about alcohol. And to me, the common denominator is like, are we left out? Are we quote dried up, washed up has-beens because we can't party anymore? Our bodies don't function like they used to. Do you hear that narrative around um being midlife? Like, oh my God, I can't party like I used to. I can't do anything like I used to.
Yeah, and I think there we can make a whole list of all the shitty stuff that happens to us in menopause and in midlife, right?
Yeah.
Oh, the list would be really long. But let's also look at the list that is also really awesome.
Yes.
So, it's the I have more balls now than I had in my 40s. I feel like I've had this life experience that, you know, I don't give a shit what people think of me a lot, which is why I feel so comfortable talking about this topic without people judging me. I don't really care what you think, right? There's some really beautiful things that come out of this stage of life. Um, I have I know who my friends are at this point. I'm comfortable in those relationships. I feel like I can enjoy life a little bit more because I don't have some of those pressures that I had when I was younger with kids and getting them through college and all that. So there's some there's some real beauty to that. I don't have grandkids, but I hear that's wonderful too. But for all the physical things that we complain about, I think there's other really amazing things about being I'm 61. I I don't think I trade it.
Yeah. I love that you said that because that's exactly where I was hoping the conversation would go is yes, there's all these downsides to being midlife and menopause and to giving up. But what I focus on in sobriety is what are you going to gain?
Yes.
And some of the most powerful work I've done in sobriety is reclaiming a sense of agency over your body and over who you are and learning to say, set boundaries and say, like, just like you said, I don't give a fuck what people think anymore.
Mhm.
I mean, in order to live authentically and a sober life, so I was curious if that type of conversation shows up in your work and coaching with women in midlife.
Yeah, because I'm like, we've got goals.
Yes.
We still have goals. I mean, I I hope to God that I am 85 and I am driving my daughters crazy, you know? This I wanna be mobile. I wanna be healthy to enjoy life. I just came back from a trip with my daughter, to Europe. It's a long story, but we were hiking the hills and the steppes of Tuscany, and I kicked her ass on
I
those
love it.
hills, and she's 28. And the reason I was able to do that is because I'm focusing on me right now. I'm focusing on my health because, yes, I wanna look great in my jeans, I wanna be comfortable in a swimsuit, but more importantly, I wanna be healthy so I can have these experiences 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And I want women to feel empowered that you are in the driver's seat and it is not too late to focus on your health, whether that means giving up alcohol, giving up the sweets, getting your tush out there and, going for a 3-mile walk, going to the gym, lifting heavy, heavy weights, not the little pink dumbbells. We're done with those.
Okay.
But you are in the driver's seat. And look, you can change the trajectory of your life just by focusing on your health. It can change everything. How you see the world, how you see other people. It's just yeah, it's empowering. It is absolutely empowering. And if part of that narrative is you need to re-examine your relationship with alcohol, I'm all for it because that is some of the toughest conversations I have with my clients, Kate, is tell me about your drinking habits. And they don't want to tell me. But I said, I need to know because we got to work on some strategies to help you manage this because you tell me you want to lose 20, 25 pounds and we're not going to get there if you're drinking 3 glasses of wine every night. So you have to have the conversation and not be afraid to broach it.
Yeah, I have friends that are nurse coaches like myself, and they focus on, menopause, weight loss, health, all those various aspects, and they will say the same thing that eventually they get to the conversation of how much are you drinking? And they will find that people love to, um, you know, just write down a small number, a few glasses of wine here and there. But yet there's this whole other problem of I can't lose weight, I can't sleep, my mood swings are all over the place. And they definitely want to avoid that conversation around alcohol. So I am very aware that that goes on, and it even goes on in my coaching practice. That people love to minimize, not love to, but they feel inclined and they feel they need to minimize. It's hard to admit to the world how much we actually drink sometimes.
Yeah. And it's a crutch. It's an absolute crutch. And you know, I tell my clients when they first start working with me, I say, okay, here's the deal. Your kitchen has to close at 7 o'clock. That means no pantry crawl at 9:30 for the Teddy Grahams. And that also means no Chardonnay, no Sauvignon Blanc, whatever your poison is. And I try to get them to commit to that. I do say, okay, on Saturday, that's your day. You can have a treat. And that treat can be ice cream. It can be it can be nachos, or it can be that big old glass of wine that you've been putting off all week. But, it's that dangling carrot, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying no, not never. And I'm not saying that if you're going out to celebrate your best friend's birthday, you can't have that glass of champagne. I'm just saying, let's try to just curb it
Mhm.
at night at home because we got to start somewhere.
Yeah. I'm just happy to hear these conversations are being had in wellness coaching overall because there was a time when we weren't talking about this, and I have today come across nutritionists, dietitians, exercise coaches, fitness coaches who were leading these entire practices while also hiding their own drinking. And so this was like the elephant in the room. And it has to be, even if it is a subject simply around sugar, even if we frame alcohol simply around its sugar, carbohydrate content, and how it affects our hormones or our blood sugar, that's enough to as a start, you know, to dive a little bit deeper into that topic.
Yeah. Yeah, and then that doesn't even count the conversation around, uh, the high incidence of breast cancer and other things. And let's not forget, dementia is the other one. We talk about sugar, but they're saying that dementia is really type 3 diabetes because there's such a strong link with lifestyle with this
Yeah.
one. So, there's lots of conversations we can have around the, long-term alcohol use.
Well, I'm loving this conversation, and I hope to have many more with you because I do feel like we could talk about all the things uh, for the entire day. But I'm glad we addressed some heavy hitters. Fuel your body, get your sleep, and certainly talk to someone about it. I think as women, and anyone, it's so hard to find someone that will hold space for these conversations where we can be honest about what it really looks like. I try to be open with my clients in my personal struggle just for that, for them to come to me with their own level of honesty. So I just really appreciate this conversation.
Oh, and I appreciate you having me on the show. I love talking about women's health, and I am a huge advocate for women just taking the bull by the horns and saying, enough is enough. This is not the path I want to go. And, you know, like I said, it's never too late.
Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. Where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram under my podcast name, which is asking for a friend underscore pod. And I'm on Facebook, not as much, but my podcast can be found on all the podcast platforms, including YouTube. And yeah, reach out to me there.
Yeah, I love that. Your podcast is excellent, by the way. So check
Oh,
her
well,
pod
thank you.
out. All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Michelle. This was a great episode, and I hope to have many, many more conversations about women's health moving forward.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks for tuning in to Rewired Sober. You can find me on my Instagram at Rewired Sober, where there are links to catch up with me and all the things I'm working on in my coaching business, or the link tree to my business directly will be in the show notes. I so appreciate you joining me on this journey, and I welcome any feedback or any topics you want to hear about, things that you're struggling with or interested in. I love you all so very much, and I'm just so enjoying doing this with you.